This is Decoding Learning Differences with Kimberlyn Lavelle. This episode is Autism Lived. It is an interview with Peter Crosbie. Peter is in France, and I found him just by typing in Autism Advantage into Google, particularly because of a book called The Dyslexic Advantage. I wanted to know if there's something similar for autism, and I assumed there was. So I came across Peter's website, the Autism Advantage, or autism-advantage.com, and he has all these articles about autism and some of the advantages that you might find if you have autism. So I would recommend checking out his website, but this interview shares his story of discovering the autism within himself at a much later age in life, and how it kind of helped him make sense of the entirety of the rest of the earlier parts of his life. He also, through a lot of his research and talking with various families, he's come with a lot of wisdom that we get into a lot more towards the middle to end of the interview. I would say getting into some of the real meat of what we can do in our mindset as parents. One of the things he suggests is to try to help them be more autistic. And so listen for that, and he can kind of give a little bit of insight into it. There was one portion of the interview where there was some sound issues for a little bit, possibly because of the distance of our conversation. But so a few minutes got edited out, but we kind of summarized it right after that anyway. So it all worked out. And I hope you greatly enjoy this interview with Peter Crosbie. At the end, please email me to tell me what were your takeaways. What did you learn? How will you apply this? Kimberlyn at decodinglearningdifferences.com. Without further ado, here's our interview with Peter Crosbie. Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for taking time to be part of this podcast today. I just wanted to start by having you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey and your experiences.
Hi, Kimberlyn. So I'm Peter Crosbie. My journey. Well, I'm in my late 60s, so it's a bit of a journey. I am a musician, or kind of more was a musician perhaps, but a musician, or still am really. I grew up in Australia in small towns in the middle of nowhere mostly. Managed to become a professional musician and make it work. And do a lot of the sort of successful professional musician things, and I managed to sort of tour the world and make records and all of that stuff. And through that, I had the opportunity to work in London. And basically, I went to London and I never went back to Australia. And I moved with my wife to Belgium, and we lived in Belgium for nearly 20 years. And we've now lived in France, where I live in Paris for just over 10 years. So yes, I have a wife. I mentioned that along the way. And I have two young adult children. So, and yes, seeing this is about autism, my autism story is a kind of very simple one, is that one day I was sitting at home this is 5.5 years ago now, and just by accident, I just heard something. I often listen to the BBC, and there was just a fleeting remark that someone made on a program about autism, and the penny dropped straight away, and I like most people, I didn't really know anything about autism. I thought it was something that some kids had. I had a couple of friends who had autistic kids, but I didn't really have anything to do with them. And I spent 15 minutes on Google and recognized that I was autistic, although the things that were the giveaways for me are not the ones. One of the things about autism is when you're autistic, the sort of view from the inside is very different from the view from the outside. And the things that I recognized straight away in what I was seeing is nothing to do with the kind of the social stuff or the language stuff or any of that, but things like sensitivity to light and sound. That was the first one I got straight away, because both of those certain sounds are a real problem for me, always have been. And the thing with light is, I'd never realized I had a sensitivity to light until something I saw it written in front of me, and I realized that I nearly always drive the car with the sun visor down, for example. It's just this constant thing of trying to reduce the level of light. A few other things. I have a really poor sense of balance, quite clumsy. I bump into things and people all the time. It was those sort of things that gave it away for me, as well as the fact that I can't look anyone in the eye, and never been able to. And just seeing all that in front of me, it was like, oh my God. And I managed to get a diagnosis very quickly after that. I had, in about a month, I had my diagnosis and I became autistic. So that's my sort of life stroke autism journey. And then I've spent the last 5 years or so trying to make sense of all that, both in the present, in how I live and how I go about being an autistic person in the world, and also sort of revisiting my life through that lens and understanding all the things that have happened and why, and it just puts so many things into context. And the other sort of interesting thing as well is that my most vivid memories from when I was a child and growing up and even as a young adult, they're all like sort of light bulby autism moments. It's like there were these signs all the time saying, look at this, you're autistic. They're the things that somehow I remember in my life, these sort of flash moments, that obviously I didn't pick up. Obviously no one else picked up. I mean, when I was a kid, there wasn't even a diagnosis of autism, not to speak of, and certainly not for people like me. So yeah, that's my kind of story.
So looking back, how do you feel like that has played out, or what are some of those memories that you're like thinking of that?
Well, I think the earliest one, a very early memory I have, is when I was about 6 or 7, and realizing that I didn't get people and people didn't get me, or kids, not people, kids. And that was a very vivid memory of a birthday party, my birthday party, and realizing that even at my own birthday party, I couldn't connect with the other kids. And that was the last birthday party I've ever had. I've never had a party after that. I mean, I've had sort of, quiet whatever with friends or my family, but I've never, or any sort of party. I've never held any sort of party. That was the last one I've ever sort of put my hand up for. So, I mean, that's a sort of a big one. Um, um, yeah, just a lot of a few events where I had real trouble communicating with people who were trying to communicate with me. When I was a kid, especially through adolescence, I mean, quite how I managed to get through adolescence without ever getting beaten up or anything like that. I really don't know, because I was just asking for trouble, because people would ask me genuine questions and I would be unable to answer, or I could see that they were trying to talk to me, but being unable to really respond in a way that was sort of expected, or not knowing what to say, saying the wrong thing, constantly saying the wrong thing, of course. But as the great blessing of growing up in these very small country towns where I grew up in, you just had to get along with everyone, because there was no one else. If you wanted to have kids to play with, you just had to play with whoever was available. It didn't matter if they were a bit weird, or it didn't, the boys used to play with the girls. We used to play with the kids that were older, play with the kids, all that stuff that you don't sort of do if you have a choice. But we didn't have a choice. So it's one of the things I sometimes think of my life, my sort of autistic life, as really, it's that line in the Bible, although I'm not religious at all, about going through the eye of the needle, getting a camel through that. That's a bit my life. It's just a whole lot of circumstances that made it possible for me, and I recognize how lucky I've been. But in these small communities, it was okay to be a bit different. It was, people just got on with it because we had to. So. And even the thing with getting into music was also fantastic, because I was good at it, and that got me through a lot. That gave me something to do. It gave me a place in my sort of, amongst my peers, my social group. It gave me some friends. It gave me something to talk about. Eventually, it gave me a way of having relationships with girls. I mean, everything. Even though at times it was really, really, really difficult, especially between about when I was about 15 or so until I was in my early 20s, 22, 23, when I managed to get a kind of, my music career started to be a proper career. That period in the middle there, 6 or 7 years of I mean, that transition from being a kind of school kid to being a young adult and working and stuff. It's difficult for everyone, but that was really tough.
Is there anything that you think would have made it easier for you, like looking back now?
It's really, really interesting question, and it's one that I just ask myself so often, and it boils down to, I think, and also another way perhaps of phrasing it is, if I'd known I was autistic, how could what would that have changed? And in some ways, I'm concerned that I would be concerned that, in actual fact, if I'd known, I wouldn't have put myself out there as much as I did. Because I recognize now in some ways how sort of risky that was. And certainly, as I said, I took some real knocks along the way, but it's a hard question to answer, because when I grew up I was born in 1953, so I was growing up, even as in my adolescence was in the late 60s. Well, what did sort of support for autistic people mean then? One of the things that I would say now, if that was me now, and I was sort of adolescent now, that the thing that I would hope someone would say to me is spend time with other autistic people in, of your same age. Well, at the time, there was no way of finding those people. There were no groups. There was no, autism didn't exist really. So it's hard, I think it's hard to say. I think it's interesting looking at the journeys of sort of older autistic people like me, and how we managed to get through it, without any of that. So that's a roundabout way of not answering your question at all. I accept that, but I don't know. I don't know. I certainly, as I said, there's lots of things I wouldn't have done if I'd known, and perhaps some things that I would have done, and perhaps there's some things I could have handled differently, knowing what my limitations were, especially on the kind of social side that comes with working and having a career and all
that. Do you feel like your autism, or the whatever, that if the autism has anything to do with you becoming a musician, like are those, and I know, some of what you've written and other articles you've linked to, they've talked about like that traditionally we don't really think of any creative pursuits as being autistic, and then we think of music as a creative pursuit, and they're kind of, and the one article that you had referenced on your website, I'm trying to remember which one it was, talked about that there really is a connection there that isn't illuminated very often. Do you think it played at all, or do you think it's just like a different, I don't
that. Why? I mean, I think in my case it completely played. I mean, the way I see and understand music, I recognize now. I see it completely, as an autistic person, and it fits the way we tend to see the world. And for example, that eye for detail or ear for detail, for example. I also seem to have this relationship with time, music in time, that other people don't have, or have. No, that's not true at all. But they seem to be able to access a feeling for form in time, not in the same way or not to the same extent that I can. I can sort of see a piece of music flat, as it were. All the events, I can see them simultaneously as opposed to sequentially. So then you say, oh, that bit, we can put it there, or this bit needs that bit. And that, the thing of form is always something that I've always been good at it. I mean, I've actually got a music site. I don't know if you've ever visited that. It's petercrosbie.net, I think it is. And I do a lot of analysis there of, well, it's, popular music, vernacular music, rock music, and so on. So yeah, I feel definitely that that's been a real plus. And now that I'm mixing with more autistic people, there's a lot of autistic people in creative fields, a lot. A lot of people writing, a few people in art, not always people with a high profile, but a high enough, or people who are working and doing good work, design, things like that, even things like graphic design and so on. uh, yeah, I don't know. I definitely think of autism is uh, well, it's very creative. Not to say that non-autism isn't creative also, but I always I tend to think of it as something that's opens the door to perhaps a more creative way of seeing the world. But it's in some ways not. I'm not. Don't mean we're clever or we're smart. It's just you treat information differently, and that by definition is what creativity is. That's all. I have a creative way of surfing the internet. It seems, when I surf the internet, it's very different to the way my family looks at the internet. They sometimes come to me and say, "Oh, can you find this? Can you find that?" And equally, I sometimes have to go to them because my creative way of surfing the internet is not helping me find what I'm looking for. But yeah, I definitely think of autism in terms of creative fields and as leading to a very creative way of looking at the world.
Yeah, I love what you were saying there about that it's like different, that the, for lack of a better word, the neurotypical versus the autistic person might both be in the same field, but they're looking at it differently. And the autistic person has their own creativity, their own version of creativity that is in some ways more creative because it's so much more unique than a more neurotypical creative person.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah, I mean, by definition, I mean, I know from my own experience, if you're working in any kind of creative arts field, um, the object of the exercise is to do something that hasn't been done before. That's what you're trying to do. So the ability to see things differently gives you a bit of a head start. Um, the trouble is, I feel well, this is the whole thing also about autism, is one of the things also, like when I look back about my career and so on, I can see that I had all that, but what would have really worked well for me would have been having a kind of opposite of that to work with. And I never really had that. I was always working kind of by myself. Um, but even that is, as I said before, that's one of the limitations of being autistic in terms of my own career, my life, because I had real trouble working with people, because you tend to see things in black and white. You want things done in a certain way, and so on and so on. And it takes a lot of trust. And I found or realized early on that it was just basically easier to be in a position where you were telling other people what to do. So that's what I got myself into, that position where I was a kind of a leader. But what would have worked better for me would have been to be more part of something. But that was too. I mean, I think that comes back to your earlier question. If I'd realized that, I could have made more of an effort to go there, to go to that place in terms of working with other people. So that I definitely don't want to say, oh, autistic people, fantastic, creative, we're all geniuses. Yes, but that's you don't always want a genius. Sometimes you just want someone who knows how to put stuff together, and it's the kind of, oh, that's a genius idea. What do we do with it? There's a lot of that, I think.
Yeah, we need a lot of balance in life, and we need people who recognize their strengths and their weaknesses and can balance with other people with complementary strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I definitely, I just think, I mean, I don't know if you've looked into any, something, I mean, autism is such a vast unexplored field, but there's been some really interesting work done by, what do they call them? Not forensics, like psychology. Basically, people who are psychologists, but who look at history through the eyes of psychology, and seeing autistic people and how they lived in the role, they trying to work out the role they played in society, say 50,000 years ago. And you see there, and so they go back to sort of tribes who have, or groups of people or tribes who have had minimal contact with, say, Western society, or they're looking at historical records of, these sort of first contact experiences and anthropology and so on. And you see there that the autistic people, when it's clear that what we're looking at is autistic people, because obviously these are not people who have a diagnosis. You see there that that's how it works, that they're complementary to the non-autistic people in their tribe or in their family group or whatever. They bring something that the others don't, and vice versa. And there's those, there's a story, for example, there's actually a book which I never read, but I've seen some of the sort of the authors talking about it, where for example, they found a tribe somewhere in the wilds of Siberia, very remote, very ancient kind of group of people who still lived a sort of traditional nomadic kind of life, and their life is built around reindeer. They have this huge reindeer herd, which is a communal herd owned by the tribe, which is I don't know how many people, and they have a couple of thousand reindeer. And there's one person in that tribe who knows every single reindeer, and also their, what do you call it, their lines. So that reindeer is related to this one, and that related to that one, and this one here, 10 years ago, their father or their mother had this disease, and so on and so on. So he was a really, really valued, important member of the tribe, even though he basically kept to himself. He hardly spoke. He was very uncomfortable around people, and so on and so on. But because of that, he had a place in the tribe. He was supported. It also gave him, of course, access to, he had a wife, because if in those sort of tribal groups, if you have a status, if you have a place, then you're a good catch, basically. So he had a wife and so on. There's things like that. I mean, it's a great story. I don't know if you've read the Simon Baron-Cohen book that's just come out. I think it's called The Pattern Seekers, which I'm sort of, whatever, I feel a bit mixed about Simon Baron-Cohen, but anyway, it's an interesting book, and he cites the case there, which is contemporary, a young autistic man who he goes out with a fisherman because he can look at the waves and see where there are shoals of fish. So it's this sort of symbiotic relationship. He's someone who struggles to live independently. He's on the verge of not being able to live independently or with any sort of autonomy, but he has this unique skill and this unique gift that gives him a place and gives him support. So I think that's it's also the key to things like work, to all those sort of things, career, all of that stuff, is finding a way where you can be supported in things that are not working for you, or that things that don't work for you become incidental, but where what your perhaps often quite narrow but very unique capabilities can dovetail with what's going on around you. I think that's, but then you need a very special sort of environment for for that to happen, and special sort of bosses and even special sort of colleagues at work who understand that and accept it. And that's not always the case. That's not always possible.
So I'm trying to, go back to like my listeners are typically parents of young children. Some of them may have children. Well, some of them certainly have children with autism. And a lot of times we focus on the deficits and what we need to like kind of correct in the child. But there's definitely a lot of what you're saying and a lot of what you're writing about is that there is a lot of a need to recognize those strengths that each individual child has and maybe foster those. Would you say that?
Well, I think it's a very I mean, it's a completely legitimate way of seeing it, and but I don't see autistic kids as having deficits any more than any kid has a deficit. A little girl has a deficit that she's not a boy. A little boy has a deficit that he's not a girl. I mean, we can always define any child by what they're not, by what they're not capable of, by what doesn't work for them, by what their shortcomings are.
Right.
Or we can take them as they are and give them enough support in the things that aren't working for them, so that the things that do work can sort of come to the fore and function. So I mean, I think that I'm speaking a little bit, as both a parent and as an autistic person, but in my experience, I mean, I've met quite a few parents and a few, quite a few people have contacted me through the site, and I've, sat down with a few people. And I think most non-autistic parents are unaware that this is not a criticism, because I would have put myself in exactly the same position, of how normative their vision of even their own children is. It's to some extent unavoidable, and it's very, very hard to put aside the model that you have in your head of what a child is, of who a child is and what they do. And it's very hard to say have an autistic child and not be making those comparisons. Oh, whatever, my son doesn't do this, or my daughter can't do that, or, well, all children can't do something. So I think it's our role as parents to just accept our children as they are. There's a lot of what I see. It's a bit like, you're a heterosexual parent, and then one day your son comes to you and says that they're gay. Well, you have to then put aside the model you have in your head of the kind of heterosexual life that your son was going to lead. That all goes out the window. But you hopefully accept that there's another life there, and it doesn't look like the life you know, and probably it's a life that you have no experience of, and it's probably pretty scary and so on. But that's where we have to get to as parents. I think you have to put aside ideas about, I mean, I'm always sort of struck a bit, because autism is understood as a neurodevelopmental difference, and then when the kids develop differently, people are surprised. It's completely normal that, you know, your child may or may not speak or communicate in a way that you do, or that your other children do, or that other children do. But this is not that child. So what they're doing is completely normal for them, and it's our job to get to a place where we accept it as that, and not be thinking, oh God, how can I get my child to talk? Your child will talk when they have something to say or not. You know, and that one especially, the, you know, language, it's, for me, it's a classic case, because you get kids that are a chatterbox up until they're 6 or 7, then suddenly they stop talking and they start talking again until they're 11. You get the, you know, the Greta Thunbergs, who, once they come up against all the social problems that arise, and, you know, around sort of puberty, going into high school, around that age, they just decide just to stop talking. I mean, she just stopped talking for I don't know how many years. I mean, she spoke with her parents, but no one else. I mean, I know people now who function, who have careers and all of that thing, but they can only have access to language for about half the day, the first half of the day. Once the day builds up and there's more and more has gone on, they reach a stage where they just can't access language anymore. And okay, I don't have a problem with language, but equally, it's not. I would prefer not to be talking. Frankly, it's not. If you're autistic, I think it's always complicated, and it never comes out right. You know, what's in your head. Just the words that come out of your mouth, it's just not that. And it can be really frustrating. I can understand a lot of people who just say, well, I'm just not going to say anything. And I can actually understand people who don't see the need to talk. But, you know, we live in a world where talking is the norm. So, but I think those, you know, even at a really fundamental level like that, we have to question what sort of normality means. And normality can be whatever works for that person. Is that can be the new normal. So what was your original question? I've completely forgotten.
I think you basically, I was asking about, like, if we should be focusing on like supporting their strengths.
Yeah, well, of course, but I mean, I think even that can be problematic for non-autistic parents in recognizing what strengths are. Because often, you know, strengths can be things that don't look like strengths if you're looking at it through a sort of neurotypical lens, you know. You know, there's so many instances of autistic kids who develop these very strong interest in something, and all of a sudden, you know, 15 years later, they pop up somewhere with some amazing skill or achievement or capability, and it all came because when they were 15, they were obsessed by ants or bugs or something. You know, you see that sort of thing all the time, and but that's the thing I was referring to before about autism being neurodevelopmental. This path, it's going to go off into the woods. You're going to lose sight of it, and then it's going to come out somewhere completely unexpected. And yeah, I'm sure that that's really scary, but it just, it's a different way of being a person. It's a different way of developing. It's a different way of making your way through life. And, you know, that difference is, for us, that's our normal. And so, I mean, to the extent that I, have any sort of real insights on parenting autistic kids, I just think that it just needs a lot of acceptance and a lot of putting aside of expectation. It doesn't mean don't challenge the kids, absolutely not, quite the reverse, but you can never expect your autistic kid to be a non-autistic kid. They are never, ever in their life going to not be non-autistic. Never, not for one moment. And I think that has to be something that's embraced.
I love that. Yes, that gotta embrace it. Truly accept them. Kind of that unconditional love of just you are who you are. It also made me think the Maria Montessori's follow the child type of approach of just watching, observing, and then presenting them with the things that they seem to be ready for or interested in, but it's directly related to what they're already doing and pursuing, rather than what the book says to do over here or something.
Yeah.
It's child led.
Yeah, but that's very, I mean that's brilliant, of course, but it's very hard to do. And I speak from experience because our kids went in Belgium to a school. It's not Montessori, so it's another system, but in that area, and in some ways, I would say more let the child lead, even more so than that. And one of the things they did at this school, which was actually, it's a very well-established school in Brussels, well known, people queue up to get into it. In fact, there's a few of them. There's a real network of them, so much demand for it. And one of the things is they don't push the kids to learn to read. They just say the kids, when they're ready to read, they'll start reading. And all the parents go, yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And then what's the first thing that happens? When the kids are not reading, when their cousins or their friends down the road and all these other kids are starting to read, and the kids in this school are not reading, the parents all kind of freak out. And I've been in sort of parent-teacher evenings there where almost every single parent in the room is saying, but can we not just teach them at home? Or can we not, why don't you just give them some lessons in reading, and so on and so on. And it's very easy to say, just let them lead, be aware of where they're leading, be sensitive to it, encourage it, help it, da, da, da. But when it doesn't look like what you're expecting, that, I think that's very hard. And I think parents of autistic kids, that if you're not autistic, I think it's a hell of a challenge to stop doing what you want to do, basically.
I definitely can see that and agree with that. That yeah, we have this constant, this idea, this the dream of, yes, just follow the child, but then we have this like secret wish that our child will be the one that does want to learn to read, and oh, they're not, and and we do feel disappointed if they're not the one that is excelling and doing,
Yeah.
and there is that, we have these expectations that it's so hard to let go of. And I think the sooner we recognize them, the sooner we can let go of them, and the sooner we let go of them, the more our children can benefit.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether they're an autistic child or not.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I would say to autistic parents, which is probably going to sound absolutely ridiculous, and the last thing they want to hear is that your objective has to be to try and help your kid be as autistic as possible. That's what you have to do. And if you can get there, then a lot of these other issues are going to they're going to become a lot less important, I think, and it'll be a lot less stressful for the kid, and so on and so on.
You've said so much great stuff about accepting children as, you know, and seeing them as autistic and celebrating their autism as a, you know, like celebrating those autistic traits that most people are afraid of, but we need to celebrate it and encourage it and support it. It sounded though like you're talking about kind of that sometimes kids they're sensitive to their environment, they can't articulate that, and maybe as parents to notice.
Yeah, no, what I was going to say was, you know, autistic kids, there's a lot of stress, but if you're autistic, there's always a lot of stress. I mean, we all live with it all the time. But apart from the stress, the sensory stress, there's the stress to not be autistic. And if we can remove that, you know, if we can stop trying to make autistic kids non-autistic, they'll start to become more non-autistic, if that makes sense. If you want this, I was going to say already backwards again, but if you want your kid, if you have an issue with stimming, that's a problem. But if you accept your kid as they are, and they feel better in themselves and more comfortable in who they are, whatever that is, they're not going to need to stim as much. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
If they want to, great. Just accept it. And the more you fight against that, the more they're going to need to be doing it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. We have to take away that added stress of don't do that. The thing that's helping you to de-stress is just then making them feel more stressed, and then they feel the need for it more. But if the more we accept every part of every child, the more.
Yeah. And it's a bit like, this isn't exactly right, but it was in something I saw once or read about once where, you know, a sort of whatever adolescent young guy had come out as gay to his parents, and he liked, you know, wearing makeup and stuff, but he'd never done it in front of his parents. And the first time he came down, he was going out and he had, you know, a lot of makeup on. And his mum said to him, "Your lipstick's the wrong color." That's what we need to be doing. Not take the makeup off.
Yeah.
How can we make it work better? You know?
Right.
I think there's a lot in thinking about, maybe it's just for me, maybe it's a helpful way of understanding it for me also, about thinking about what you would do, you know, if your child was gay. I think there's so many parallels in there, and it's no accident that, for example, you know, Neurotribes, the Steve Silverman book, it's from a gay author, because I think gay people get autism. They get at much I think you know, they get it a lot more, or a lot easier, I think, than perhaps what heterosexual people do. I don't know. Maybe that's a terrible generalization to be making, but anyway, I mean, I think
parallels, though.
Sorry?
There's parallels, is what you're saying, between that experience of having having autism, being gay, having an autistic child, having a gay child, there's parallels.
Yeah. Well, I said there's a fantastic documentary that, I live in Paris, in France, came out last year called Petite Fille, which means little girl. And it's a documentary made by a kind of well-known French filmmaker, and it follows a young trans girl who's born a male from when she's about 6. And it's incredible when the mum says, we just reached a stage where I just had to put her in dresses because she was so unhappy. And the thing of fighting it, of trying to make her what she clearly wasn't, and helping her be a girl, and showing her how to be a girl in terms of doing her hair and so on and so on. And that really, really resonated for me, seeing that, and the struggle that the mother had of just sort of fighting against this sense of what I'm doing, everything I'm doing is wrong. And there's this real quite sort of touching scene where eventually they get to go and meet a psychiatrist who specializes in gender dysphoria. And one of the first things the mother says to her is, am I wrong to let her, dress in girls, dress as a girl and have her hair done as a girl and so on and so on. And just the psychiatrist says, no, of course not. And she bursts into tears. And it's, I think it's that. But there was a great line that relates to that Owen Siskind, who he is? He's a young autistic man now, but he's the son of Ron Siskind, the writer or journalist, very well-known Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist or author, who at around the age of 3 or 4, the classic story, suddenly one day stopped talking and completely stopped, outwardly anyway, communicating, got the autism diagnosis and so on and so on, and spent his day watching Disney movies, often just a single sequence over and over and over and over. And to cut a long story short, eventually they realized that they could communicate with him by being these Disney characters. And they realized that, for example, by watching all these Disney films, he'd learnt to read and write, for example, just by watching the credits and working out what the words meant. And eventually he learns to communicate again, and using words and so on, and gets a job eventually as a cinema usher, because his thing's always been films and Disney films and stuff. And there's been and his parents wrote a book about it and have sort of done the rounds doing presentations and stuff. And his mother said a fantastic thing once in relation to all that, in terms of, Ron's obviously this brilliant author, and I think she's some academic or stuff. And their son's working as a cinema usher. And she says, who gets to define what a meaningful life is? And I think that's, you have to let go of what you think. We'd all love our kids to be brain surgeons, but if your kid wants to be a farmer or a cook or a gardener or whatever, then isn't that wonderful?
That's beautiful. And we should probably end it there.
Okay.
Gone a little long. But you have so much wisdom. So and one thing I realized that we kind of talked about your website, but we never actually that was how I found you. Is I was looking up, I actually had typed in Autism Advantage to see what would come up, and your website came right up. Because so you're at autism-advantage.com,
Yeah.
and you have a lot of articles you've written, and then you link out to other articles that are very, very interesting, and they have so much more wisdom. So I definitely want to send people there. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes below the video or the podcast wherever you're listening.
Great.
Is there any? Oh, and you also said you have another website.
Well, that's a music one. I mean, it's pretty hardcore. It's a sort of theoretical music theory, really. Well, it's just my name, Peter. I think it's petercrosbie.net. I mean, I'll double check when I get off this. And,
okay. I'll link that too, just because I'm sure there will be some people who will be interested and want to check that out too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, really great to talk to you. I mean, I don't, as I say, I don't actually claim any expertise or actually any wisdom, especially when it comes to parenting autistic kids. But we are who we are, and
yeah, I think you shared a lot of really beautiful insight, and things that we need to constantly be reminding ourselves about, just for all parents who are listening, to just accept your child for who they are, and that it's a constant battle to not to kind of squash any expectations and just celebrate every little thing that they are doing.
yeah,
it seems like something that, like the hand flapping, that, oh no, we don't want that, but celebrate it. And then I think that's beautiful.
yeah.
So thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
It was great.
Okay.